Hello everyone, this is Vassiliki Rapti, founding director of Citizen Tales Commons.
And I'm Peter Bottéas, one of the founding members of Citizen Tales Commons.
And this is our podcast series, which is called
Borders Unbound, the poetry of the Hellenic diaspora and beyond.
This is the second episode of our podcast series, and we're thrilled to have with us today award-winning poet, translator, and actor Hélène Cardona.
Our remarkable guest, Hélène Cardona, is a supremely multilingual and multinational creator and artist in so many fields. Born in Paris of a Greek mother and Spanish father, she was raised all over Europe and is a citizen of the United States, France, and Spain. She studied English philology and literature in Cambridge, England. She holds a translation diploma from the Royal Society of Arts. She studied Spanish philology and literature in Spain and German in Germany and France, and attended Hamilton College in New York State, where she also taught French and Spanish. Hélène is also a graduate of the Sorbonne in Paris, where she wrote her thesis on Henry James for her master's in American literature. She worked as a translator and interpreter for the Canadian Embassy in Paris and has taught in various places in France and the U.S., in addition to working as a French language expert for arbitration. But her skills and talents don't stop there. She's a graduate of the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, and she's known for her acting roles in the films Chocolat, The 100-Foot Journey, and many others. Last but not least, she's also an award-winning poet and literary translator, and also a dream analyst. She has over 20 awards and honors to her credit, including a Hemingway Grant, 2 Independent Press Awards, and various other international literary honors. The 7 books she's published include 3 bilingual poetry collections. Describing her own work, Hélène says, "I write as a form of self-expression, fulfillment, transcendence, and healing, to transmute pain and experience into beauty." American poet and literary critic John Ashbery wrote this about her poetry collection Life in Suspension, La Vie Suspendue. Dappled with transparent imagery, like the Mediterranean sunlight she grew up with, Hélène Cardona's poems offer a vivid self-portrait as a scholar, seer, and muse. In her review of the same collection, Vassiliki describes it as one of the most imaginative poetic manifestations of unconditional love and grace. There the reader dons a piece of white sail wrapped like second skin, and sets off in an ecstatic hovering over an infinite space made of stars and waves. This is a seamless universe, as it is exactly a child's poetic imagination that allows for the reenactment of an oceanic feeling of bliss. The act of the rocking of a cradle activated here transforms a painful experience of loss into a constant transfusion of life, fueled by love and light. And David Mason, poet laureate of Colorado, describes her work as liminal, mystical, and otherworldly. This is a poet who writes in a rare light. Hélène, bienvenue, bienvenida, καλωσορίσατε. Welcome.
Merci beaucoup. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. I am incredibly thankful to be here with you, and thank you so much for this very warm welcome. As you know, είμαι μητέρα μου είναι Ελληνίδα, and so I was born in Paris because my mother had left Greece. She had studied law in Greece, and then she had left Greece for postgraduate studies in France at the University of Nancy. And that's where she met my dad from Spain. He was born on the island of Ibiza. And he had to leave Spain because of Franco's dictatorship, because of his writings. And he had translated, for instance, Stendhal, Le Rouge et le Noir, the red and the black. And he was going to be arrested and he got tipped off. He left Spain and he was also doing postgraduate studies at the University of Nancy. I was born in Paris. We moved very shortly afterwards. I was 1 month old, actually. We moved to Geneva, Switzerland. And so I grew up surrounded by the mountains. We first lived in the city and then outside of Geneva at the foot of the mountains. And I loved it, as a child. And I went to the music conservatory in Geneva in Switzerland and studied ballet and the piano and graduated with a second prize. So I was very infused by music and dance and nature and animals. I had a dog. So my poetry is very rooted in all of this. And I picked up German as a child in Switzerland. My parents had German friends and I wanted to learn it. And, in Switzerland, everything is written in 3 languages, French, German, and Italian. In terms of what inspires me a lot, I draw a lot from music and from nature. It's like the meditations, and when I was playing the piano, I didn't have the words for it at the time, but I entered a place that was, outside of space and time in a way. And we moved back to Paris. And I would go, since I was a child, study in England. I was an Anglophile early on. And after we moved back to Paris, I was 14 at the time. The French system is selection through mathematics. Science is considered most important there. And so I was very good at math. Actually, I excelled at math as a child. It was just a game for me. And naturally, I went into the scientific section and got a scientific baccalaureate. I could still, I had Latin since I was very young, and I kept studying Spanish and English. But the focus was on mathematics, physics, and chemistry. And of course, when you graduate from there, it's like you're not going to, the pressure is to continue in those fields. And my Greek grandfather, was a doctor. And my dad also was very keen on me being a doctor. And so at 17, I found myself in medical school. And after 2 years of that, I had a terrible depression. It was just not for me. The system didn't suit me at all. I had a breakdown. And it actually was a very, very deeply spiritual experience for me, because I got in touch with something else that was not part of my consciousness in a way, like I wasn't conscious of it. And I could say that I was pretty much an atheist until then, not that I'm religious now, but I have this connection, very strong spiritual connection to something bigger than me. And that experience, where I actually was very close to death, is really something that has stayed with me ever since. So I decided I would really do what nourishes me, because there was pressure still to get an education in terms of academics. I wanted to be an actor then, but I studied literature because I loved it. And I would do some theater on the side with the English department of the Sorbonne until I got my master's. And the theme of my master's was the search for fulfillment in Henry James's novel, The Wings of the Dove. It was just, for me, I came to the realization that I had to fulfill myself. And I had started my PhD and just really, it was like now or never, and I left for New York. So I left for New York to pursue acting, and I attended the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, which is one of the oldest drama school in the U.S., and focused there for a while. But I had been writing poetry since I was 10. And so I was still writing poetry, but I wasn't really doing much with it. And now I have learned, I have merged all my different selves, so I'm a poet, I'm a writer, I'm a translator, I'm a teacher, I'm a dreamer, I do dream work. It's just wonderful to finally have all my different selves like come together and to form a whole, basically. In a way, it happened, even though the beginnings were brutal, it ended evolving in an organic way, because when I was in New York, I studied with a wonderful coach, Sandra Seacat, and she's the one who introduced me to dream work to help build or define a character that I'm working on by asking for a dream about the character. And so I continued that dream work, where basically you work with your subconscious to find answers. So it's very therapeutic. And at the same time, I can use the dreams. A lot of my poetry comes from my dreams, and my love of animals and medicine came in a different way into my life, came back in a different way into my life because I was very interested in shamanic studies. And so that's very interesting for Catherine Streisig, because when I was in New York at the Actors Studio, one of my coaches did a workshop in Santa Fe. And that's the first time I went there to do this workshop. And I loved it. And I felt this really deep connection with the Native American culture, its relationship to nature and animals. And so ever since, I've been going to New Mexico and to Santa Fe, and I've spent a lot of time there. And so shamanism, and for me, we're all connected. We're all one, right? So humans and animals and nature. So I've kept that connection and the healing aspect of not just through the dream work, but through the writing, through the poetry, which is really to transmute, pain and experience into beauty, to just create something. You create art out of it. And that's really what the shaman does, right? You heal yourself and then you can heal others. And so that's the journey in a way. And translation comes into it as well, because I was always growing up automatically translating from one language to another, because at home there was Spanish and Greek and French, and we were going to Spain and Greece, for holidays. And then I was going to Germany and England and Wales. And so translation is really a part of everyone's life. When we think or see anything or express ourselves, we translate everything into thoughts, right? So there's an immediate process of translation. But by translating also other poets and authors, this is a way to bridge cultures. And that's what I think is wonderful about it. Like we wouldn't have access to other poets and writers if it wasn't, from different cultures, if it wasn't for translation. And so it's a way also to know yourself and to know where you're from and your roots. And it's also a way to have empathy and understand other culture and people who are different from yourself, because then you don't see the others as others, right? There should be no fear of the others. You should see how similar we are, even in our differences. For me, it all comes together that way as well. So I've translated French poets. I've translated my father, who's also a poet. In 2008, the government of Ibiza published an anthology of his work called El Bosque de Birnam, Burnham Wood, which I translated into English, and which is, a collection of poems from different collections that he had published earlier on about his love for his native land, being part of the diaspora, and also it has a political element, therefore the title Burnham Wood, in terms of the reference to Macbeth, because of what Spanish people had to endure during Franco's dictatorship. So all of that really has affected me in terms of, I don't write anything overtly political, but I think it's always there, underneath. I mean, Greece had a terrible dictatorship with the colonels, and many of my mother's friends were tortured. Vassiliki, who wrote Z, who was a friend of my mother's. We have this history in Europe where we had to live, or our family members did through dictatorships. So I think it's a more acute awareness of what goes on, like even in the U.S., right, when things happen and democracy is in danger. So for me, I think everything comes together, and the acting is a beautiful way to express myself, both in front of the camera and as a voice actor as well, because I love recording voices for movies and shows, like animal voices and all kinds as well. So in a nutshell, that's my background. If you want, I can read the title poem of Life in Suspension, which is my history until I first came to the U.S. Life in Suspension. Let me introduce myself. I'm the memory collector, your companion and spirit guide. Let's unwind the clock, peel the past. The reflections you give me, conjure, surrender from within, I throw into the fire, the cauldron of resolutions. They burn into embers and flickers that evolve into butterflies. They flutter away, heal and free you of all chains, so they can revisit and reinvent who you are. Let the dance begin. I'm in my mother's womb in Paris. She's scared. I want to get out. I'm 3 years old in Terracina, Italy, sharing a room with 4 girls. My grandfather visits from Greece. He holds my brother on his lap and says, "A boy at last. I'm not impressed with girls." I'm 4 years old in Monte Carlo. My mother takes me to school. A pigeon poops on my scarf. She reassures, "It brings good luck." I'm 5 years old in Carbon, Germany. It's St. Nicholas Day, my birthday. Marie-Louise feeds me Lebkuchen, Stollen, and Pfeffernussen. They taste like heaven. I'm 6 years old in ballet class in Geneva, breaking my point shoes. The Russian master ingrains in me the correlation between pleasure and pain. And I know the 2 centers sit next to each other in the brain. I'm 7 years old in the Swiss Alps, making snowmen, skiing, hunting for Easter eggs. My mother laughs, then says, "Your father can't be left alone." I'm 8 years old in the Jura mountain, in love with my dog, playing chess with my dad. I'm ecstatic. I'm 9 years old. My grandmother takes me to the market in Tarragona to buy the bitter and pungent quince she craves. I'm 10 years old. My cousin drowns me in the beautiful blue waters of the Spanish Mediterranean because I threw sand at him. My head hits the hard bottom. All the air's gone from my lungs. My last thought is, no one knows I'm here. I'm 11 years old. My mother makes jam with apricots, strawberries, peaches, and plums. She's filled the house with the intoxicating scent of gardenias. My brother throws another temper tantrum. I'm 12 years old, in math class, mad with laughter. I'm 13 years old. The music conservatory in Geneva is sheer magic, an enchanted world I inhabit alone, the key to my soul. My piano teacher has so much faith in me. I'm 14 years old, in between worlds. My aunt married a fascist. He grabs me by the throat. It's the middle of the night. It's loud. I can't sleep. I'm 15 years old, in northern Wales, riding a fabulous horse along stunning steep cliffs, racing him to full gallop in bewitching Celtic wind, relinquishing cravings in the dust. I'm 16 years old, off to San Diego. My mother cries at the Paris airport. She breaks my heart, but the pull is stronger. I'm learning to let go, trust the ripeness of the moment, that everything happens at the right time, to appreciate what I have. I'm connected to my bones, filled with the richness and texture of space, uplifted, vibrating, reverberating. I become the sound of Tibetan bells, echoing and hovering in the cosmos. I perceive the whole world below, life in suspension. So a lot of the poems in my collections, both Life in Suspension and Dreaming My Animal Selves, are dedicated to my mother. I wrote a lot after she passed away suddenly, and so it was a tremendous shock. And it took me a while to make something of the poems, and I created these collections. So this is a poem dedicated to her. It's called To Kitty Who Loved the Sea and Somerset Maugham, and it has an epigraph by E.E. Cummins. For whatever we lose, like a you or a me, it's always ourselves we find in the sea. To Kitty, who loved the sea and Somerset Maugham, the angel who smells of my childhood, my mother, piano and oboe, whose face the icon reflects, auburn hair like a Modigliani, eyes the color of rain, light caught by surprise, whose presence the absence reveals, whose laughter burns snow, whose warm breath I breathed this morning as I woke, the scent of gardenias whispering, I never left you. And this is really how I feel, is that she's always there. Gardenias were her favorite flowers. And so one night, she came to me in a dream as the Celtic goddess, Ceridwen. And then I wrote a poem about it. My mother, Ceridwen. The light on the icon, the way I see her in my dreams, the core of her at the edge of darkness, in a magic cauldron, always full, never exhausted, that brings her back to life. Guarded by a golden serpent, coiled in the shape of an egg, the world snake marshalling inner reserves, the seed of a new journey, a glimpse of a mysterious and elusive woman crowned with morning glories. This is how she lands on the page, slanted, looking out in space, integrated within me, save the blue sky across her face. Here's a poem. It's called Galactic Architect. From the bottom rung of a ladder in the sky, I hang in the void. Ultramarine is all I need. Let it be simple. Build a cottage for the spirit to rest and soar. I trust, self-contained, in equipoise, resources at my fingertips, deep-rooted ghosts supporting the foundation of a throne, to explore and claim whole worlds, surprised to find you here with me, lighting up my life. Growing up, I think one of the things that made my childhood, I think, magical was that I read so many fairy tales, right? The French ones from Perrault, and German ones, Grimm, and Russian ones with Baba Yaga. And I was really like so infused by that universe. I think I just could spend days on end, reading them. And then, of course, we grew up with poetry in France and in Europe in general. It's really part of our life. Here is one that has, this one is called Galahad. I took the sword and laid on the bed and said, I'm walking away. Riding horses in the rain, I bless the past. All dragons become sublime fragments of life, artwork. A chance encounter in the woods, delicate, potent and violent. The dream, a gift of healing. Oh, I am Galahad and don't need to search. He carries the falcon on his arm, aims straight for the heart, hits precisely in the center, and leaves me between tears and ecstasy. I scrutinize waves for answers. They raise themselves like ghosts. Dolphins jump out of clouds, guide me among whales through incessant oceans of transformation. Galahad's eyes reigning over me. Falcon returns and says, fly with me. Let the wind claim you. This poem has an epigraph, Hart Crane, who's a poet I love. Stars scribble in our eyes, the frosty sagas, the glowing cantos of an vanquished space. A mind like lightning. Without gravity, I fly into 1,000 pieces. Add sparkle to various reflections, fallen stars, colliding lights, transform particles, waves, and dark matter. I become ocean, mercury, silver shimmers, fairy tales, fascinated. The strangeness of this atmosphere seduces, shifts consciousness, shapes bloodstreams, provokes a rush. Let the next dimension pull you. Lightning mind, prosperous poet, dualist without a fight. Let the lake talk, embrace it. And that is a poem that came from a dream where I had a couple of images, but then I engaged with them. And in what we call active imagination, where you have a dream and then you just, ask questions to. So this is how I look at dreams, right? It's partly Jungian and partly shamanic. So from the Jungian approach, I look at everything, in my life as an aspect of who I am. And I think that's true for everyone. And so in the dream, every element of the dream is a part of who I am, a part of who you are. And you can have a conversation with it. You can have a dialogue with it. And nightmares, for instance, are there to help you. It's just not easy because it's not pleasant to revisit nightmares. For me and for everyone, I think the first reaction is to just get away from it and not, want to remember it. But an element, something in your life wants to draw your attention. And if you don't become conscious of it, it'll come visit you in a dream as a nightmare to get your attention. And I'm not talking about because there's all kinds of different dreams, like the bad dreams you may have because of having eaten like heavy food, right? That's like different. But so let's say there's a figure that is threatening or animal that is, attacking you. You do want to face them because it's like facing your fear. And by engaging with it, you find out that actually that figure or that animal really is not going to attack you. It just wants something from you, an acknowledgement, for instance, or something like that. It's also interesting for me to connect how certain dreams will come at certain times in your life where they will echo something that happened in the past as well. And because it's being revisited in a different way. So like the one Dreaming My Animal Selves, both collections, but they really are very inspired by dreams. This is one, again, that was also a dream that I turned into a poem. And it has an epigraph by another poet I love, H.D., which is, when my soul turned round, perceiving the other side of everything. And it's called Pathway to Gifts. Whispers wake me. I return home behind a procession of swans to an island in the heart of Paris. On the cliffs, where the wild ones come to show themselves, I sing this whistling song. Look at the other side of the world, as if a deck of cards spread out to peek under and flip over for a glimpse at the hidden side. This, the dream, opens forgotten realms of creation. I think that's what time is. So when I met John, who's my partner and who's a beautiful poet as well, we also had this connection that I had lost my mother young, and his father had passed away even younger. And so this is a poem dedicated to him and to his father. Notes from last night. To John, in memory of his father. One can distinguish Van Gogh from Chagall, that state of in-betweenness where even objects seem alive, to do with light and looking pure. Because of all this light, I am partially blind. It doesn't matter whose ghost you see, as long as you see one. Two darknesses together across the shape of face. Warmth comes forward, cool retreats. I just experience. Talk about faith, I don't believe. Experience is cellular. In our normal state, we're not able to perceive. That's why I think the dead know. I had never before seen the beauty of it. Everything has to do with light. Every ghost, proof of the afterlight. Any ghost. And this, was a poem that came together. It was a mixture of looking at paintings. I had met this poet, this painter, Dan Bacardi, after doing Chocolat. And that's, I met Leslie Caron on the movie, and we stayed in touch. And she invited me to the premiere of Le Divorce here in Los Angeles. And so we were there and we met this painter, Dan Bacardi, this artist. And John and I ended sitting for him. Leslie had, and a lot of writers sat for him. John ended using one of his paintings for the cover of his poetry collection, The Mind. And so it was looking at different paintings and letting the light affect me, basically. Because what happens if you look at, I think, anything for a while, you start seeing an aura of sorts. But then in order to see, you need to not see. It's very interesting what happens with sight, right? So this poem came from that. And a discussion I had with John, about ghosts and how I always wanted to see one. And I wanted my mother to visit. I missed her terribly, and that never happened. She's only come to me in dreams. But one day, I was invited somewhere at a lady's house that I did not know. It was the first time I met her. She had a house in Malibu overlooking the ocean, but high up in the mountains. And I was looking at her, but I was looking out. So I was facing the light, and there was a lot of light coming in. And then all of a sudden I saw her. It's the first time I saw what I would call a ghost, because I have no other words for it. But on her shoulder was this face, this head. And I described it to her, and I said, does this resonate? And it was her mother. And she had never seen her. And it was this strange way of seeing where all of a sudden it was very real, but it's not really there, right? And it's the only time that I had such a strange experience with seeing something like that. And it did not pertain to me. It was not like anyone I knew. This poem came out because when you miss someone, you do want to find a connection, right? But the ghost came a different way. And so I put it in this poem that way. The poem I'm looking for is in this book. It's called Spellbound. And again, it has some of the fairy tale in it. Fall asleep at the lake tonight. No boundaries. Like a fairy. I am the eagle song, a calling, light defying gravity, someone to steal horses with, a case of mistaken identity, tears transforming into fish in the air, a force that propels forward, proclaims who I am, with a passport from God. Her will, an explosion, with bullets for words. I offer you everything. Stardust, silence, impish grace, and flutes like birdsong, mischievous, good and bad, pulled out of myself into the spell. I ask the unthinkable, move so fast, breathless, delicate craftsmanship. I walk on all fours, elongated, neither human nor animal, a creature you only see in magic. I'm going to share a poem of my father's from the collection of his work that I have translated. I have translated a few collections, his, which is Burnham Wood, and a beautiful French poet, Gabriel Arnaud-Jacques, Beyond Elsewhere, which is also very spiritual, long narrative poem, and Dorian Locke's, whom I translated into French this time with Éditions du Cygne in Paris. I also translated Walt Whitman into French, his war writings, which had never been translated into French. And that was done for the University of Iowa with Christopher Merrill and Ed Folsom. And they wrote also, and there were a lot of texts. They wrote prefaces and afterwards of the translations and texts. It was letters that he had written. It was poems that he had written. And during the war, he worked, the Civil War in the United States, he worked as a kind of a nurse. You know, he was helping the wounded on both sides, actually. He was writing letters to the family members of the soldiers on behalf of the soldiers, you know, which was very healing to them. And it was extremely moving to work on these translations because a war is horrible And when a country hasn't had a war in a long time, it seems a lot of people seem to forget the horrors of it. And it was really heartbreaking to read these texts and to translate them. I mean, they're very beautiful and they're very powerful. The poem I'm going to read is from Burnham Wood, and it's actually a poem that my father wrote in memory of one of his brothers. So it's called Ode to a Young Mariner, to my brother Manuel. The sea is a bride with open arms, with stout rubber balls for breasts. It is difficult to refuse her caress, dry from the lips her brackish aftertaste. Forget her sweet bitterness. Underneath her waters wails a rosary of dead centaurs, watchmen of the shadows. Handsome men, hard as anchors torn from the chest of a barbarian god. It is difficult to refuse the call of the sea, cover one's ears, grasp the neck with both hands, and become suddenly mute, or pluck out one's eyes and feed them to the fish, to ignore the gulls and red masts and so many pennants, and the ships arriving from unknown countries, and the ships departing from others, barely known, or perhaps for hours. Because we carry within, like a blue keel or masts and spars, the marine bitterness of kelp, the stripes on the back of fishes, the tarry death, and our initials written in the sea. The sea of mariners, your bride, brother moving away to the bridge, like one more piece of our island. You know the smell of death, because you tread beneath a cemetery that can be yours, and you go brightly. You know how the sea smells of life, how at times she spits a ferocious foam, how she wails wide and rises like an atavistic being, a primitive creature. We all carry death within, written in furrows, like a name traced by the keel of your boat in the sea. We are all sailors of a sleeping bride with round breasts. I don't want to depart for the land, to sprout like a eucalyptus branch, my eyes blinded by grass. Wait for me, brother, when you anchor your vessel in the sea you've loved. No need to depart so alone, mariner, brother of a seaman gripped by the earth's open jaws. My mother was born in Thessaloniki, and her mother's family was from there. Her father's family, my maternal grandfather, was from Crete. And so an island, Ibiza, an island, and the Mediterranean is so important, I think, to, Spain and Greece. France has a portion of it. But I have this connection to the sea and to the ocean, and the need to be near it. In Geneva, it was a lake. When we lived there, it was mostly mountains. I lived in New York 8-9 years before moving to Santa Monica. I feel very strongly connection to that, and I love being around it. I find it has a very healing influence on me, and I love the mountains too, of course. But, yeah.
I love the gifts of your poetry, Hélène. It's like a spellbound. In one of your poems, Spellbound, you said no boundaries, like a fairy tale. I felt like the whole reading was like that for me, very healing, very enchanting.
I just want to underscore some of the themes that really struck me and that resonated very much for me. Nature, reminiscence, the mythical, the surreal, light, images of shimmering light, stars, and so much more. And I also struck that I see so many similarities in the themes that you touch on with Vassiliki's poetry as well. And I really find a kindred spirit
in your work.
Yes, absolutely. We are kindred spirits. Yes.
Yes, and surrealism is also, and the dream work is part of that kindred spirit.
Yeah, I mean, the like I said, it was traumatic how I had to leave Europe in a way, but it was really what it was for me. It was a process of individuation, right? Because as a child, I was very eager to please my parents, and because I could do all these things, it never occurred to me that there would be a point where I couldn't do them. So I was a pianist, I was a dancer. When we moved from Geneva to Paris, I was referred to Maître Sancan, who's a master there, and most of his students really were professionals. This was going to be their profession. For me, it was just something I loved. And then I had been dancing since early on. As a matter of fact, the reason why I started dancing so early was because I started walking too early, and I was just not walking right because it happened too early. So I was put in dance class to straighten, my legs. And I loved it. I had first a Russian teacher and then a conservatory in Geneva. And then I was dancing at Salle Pleyel in Paris, and I was part of a dance company. So I found myself a math major trying to still be a pianist and still be a dancer and perform. I performed at the Theatre of the Champs-Élysées, for instance. And I loved languages and literature. I just got stretched too thin is, what happened in medical school. And I really found myself in a world where I had to give up some of the art in order to stay there. And it became too much. And then that was revisited again because, in a way, it's like some people know right away what they want to be or do. Like from an early age, they have a strong calling. And I do believe that as artists, we're called, right? It's not really a choice we have. And so for me, I wasn't able to listen to that because I was giving into the pressure. Like I wanted to please. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll be a doctor, but I'll be a dancer and a pianist. And I mean, who does that, right? I mean, that's really at 17, I was thinking those thoughts and I came crashing, right? The gift from that was, it was a deeply spiritual experience. And then it was revisited again because, after getting my master's degree, I had to realize that I had to leave Europe to be fully myself because, the pull to remain in academia was just too strong. And so later on, right, I can reconnect with teaching and such. But what's really interesting in terms of how things happen in your life, for instance, when I was in New York, after I graduated from the American Academy, I went to study at the Actors Studio. And at that time, Ellen Burstyn was teaching 2 classes, and that was it. And I was very lucky to get into one of these 2 classes. Taught it partly at the studio and partly at her house upstate New York. And at the very end of it, because she's very mythical, and so she had put on a table various objects, and she asked each of us pick one, but without knowing what it was, right? And so the one I picked was a dove, a brooch. I didn't think of bringing it because I didn't know I was going to talk about that as things happen, right? And so a dove taking flight, which is the title, The Wings of the Dove, of the novel I wrote my thesis on, in terms of, I love Henry James. It's just one of my favorite novels of Henry James too is The Ambassadors. And one of the characters says, live all you can. And so this is really what it's about. You have to live your life, you have to express yourself the way you're meant to. One talks about faith, and I mentioned it in the poem. And for me, it's not really that. It was really experiential, where I connected with something else that has stayed with me ever since. And it's true that, the faith part does come into play in the sense that you have moments of doubts, right? Like you at least me. But the sense of like, okay, I'm doing what I'm meant to do is stronger because it's really what's pulling me. I do think we are here on this earth to fulfill ourselves, a destiny, whatever it is for everyone, but it's not an accident that we do what we're doing. I think we are meant to be doing it. So it transpires into the poems and the writing. Yeah.
Hélène, I do feel like we are indeed kindred spirits, as Peter suggested earlier. And this is due partly to surrealism, from which we are both influenced, and especially from the dream work that is prominent in the surrealist movement. I'd like to know how you really work with dreams in your poetry.
I just write them when I can, and sometimes if it wakes me in the middle of the night, I have to write it then. Too tired or lazy, I can lose them in the morning, and that's happened. Otherwise, when I remember them in the morning, I write them down. So when I ask for a dream, for whatever reason, looking for an answer for something, right? I use a formula, a letter that I write, and this is what you would want to use, a letter, and that I learned through the dream work that I did, a letter to my inner self. And I ask for permission because I might be asking for something I'm not meant to know, at least at the moment, right? So I start the letter like this. It's short. It's just, dear inner self, if it is your will, please give me a dream tonight that tells me or shows me, and I ask what it is I want to know. And then I sign with love and respect and Hélène, right? And then I see if I remember the dream, because we always dream. We just don't always remember them. It's just what it is. So if I remember the dream, upon waking, I'll write it down. And if I don't remember the dream, then the day is still part of the dream, is the waking dream. So it's all one, right? It's the sleeping dream and the waking dream. And during the day, following the night where I've asked the question, there will be something unusual that day. There will be a surprise. There will be something different that will stick out. And that will be the answer. Because the answer to the question of the dream, and even if you don't have a question, but you have a dream and something is unusual about it, different, that is always the solution. And then you work with it. Yeah. I dream in the language of the country I'm in. So right now, when I'm in the U.S., I dream in English. That's that. Sometimes in the dream, there will be a word in a different language that can come up. For instance, and sometimes in the dream, there will be something new a word that I didn't know before the dream. I mean, Seridwen, I didn't know that Celtic goddess until she came into the dream. I had to look her up. So when, let's say, I go to Europe, to France, there will be a slight delay. Well, the first night or a couple of nights, I'm going to still dream in English, and then it'll switch to French. And I choose to write in English now because I live here, and English became my language of choice, when I moved to the U.S. But French is my first language, but English is my fifth. My collections are bilingual, as you mentioned earlier. And so what happens is I write in English, and then I translate them into French. And then I revise the original English a lot of the times because I find that it can be improved, because translation is very unforgiving in the sense that if the original text is not very good, it's very hard to translate, right? And for me, I always want to be faithful to the original. I want to honor it, but the idea is that to always capture the essence of the original text, even if you have to make a little change. But I really try to be faithful. With my own, I was able to be freer in the sense that if I wanted to change something, because it's my creation, it's my text, the original is, then I felt in the translation I could change something if I wanted to, which is not something I would do with any other author.
I loved your expression of a dance between languages. So in a way, diasporic poetry takes on a new meaning with your case. And in that case, you don't have this longing for one lost home, because you don't seem to long for a home, because you seem you are at home in so many languages.
Yes, well, I try.
So you really amplify the notion of diasporic poetry, and you give something new in my own perception of what diasporic poetry is. And
I think what my poetry is about healing. And for the healing to occur, there had to be tremendous wounds. And so I touched on it in the beginning. I mean, I almost died twice. And that's what it took for me to have this mobility, to come to the US, basically. And this is really where I've come to now. And it's taken quite a bit of time to really feel like I'm a citizen of the world and I'm at home, you know. And this sense of home is I think, is always going to be something, you know, that I think everybody looks for, regardless of, you know, I find ways to make myself at home, but I think home is.
I think your home is the world of imagination, the enchanting world, Hélène. It has been wonderful to share the gifts of healing of your poetry and translation with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you so much for all that you've shared of yourself and of your journey and of your exquisite poetry. And I hope we can be together again soon. This podcast series, Borders Unbound, the poetry of the Hellenic diaspora and beyond, was produced by Citizen Tales Commons and is the recipient of a 2022 Modern Greek Studies Association Innovation Fund grant. The music for this podcast is Prelude No. 5 by Greek composer Manolis Kalomiris, performed by pianist Andreas Triandafilou. We gratefully acknowledge the support of the Modern Greek Studies Association and the members of the Citizen Tales Diaspora Studies Consortium, the Hellenic American Project at Queens College, part of the City University of New York, the Institute for Eastern Mediterranean Studies at Emmanuel College in Boston, and Citizen Tales Commons, a multidisciplinary collective of translators, artists, ludics learners, explorers, and storytellers, founded and directed by Vassiliki Rapti. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, check out the first podcast in our series featuring poet George Kalogeris, and also our YouTube broadcasts in the Citizen Tales Commons Virtual Hellenic Diaspora Poetry Reading Series featuring Hélène Cardona, George Kalogeris, Yorgos Anagnostou, and others.